Okay, thank you very much. Okay, Ellen, let's go back to your side by side and hopefully we can finish this up in the next 20 minutes and move on to the next bill.
Yeah, there aren't too many more changes. So on page 2 of my side by side, we're in subsection C on the right side. Small change here. Disbursement to municipalities shall be administered by the Department of Housing and Community Development through a competitive process, providing the opportunity for all regions and any municipality to compete regardless of size. The House added, the department shall, to the extent reasonably possible, ensure that grants are awarded with the intent of achieving geographic distribution across the state. So the House was very interested in making sure that all the grants didn't go to Chittenden County.
Or Franklin.
So then moving on.
Okay.
The next 2 sections don't have any changes, but just to remind you, funds may be dispersed by the department in installments to ensure the municipal bylaw updates meet the goals of the section. Funding may be used for mapping, the cost of regional planning commission staff or consultant time, carrying out the provisions of subchapter 5 through 10 of this chapter, and any other purpose approved by the department. On to page 3. To receive a grant, the municipality shall identify any municipal water supply and wastewater disposal activity, capacity, opportunities, and constraints within mapped service areas in both traditional water and wastewater systems and smaller scale municipal systems, including soil-based wastewater treatment and decentralized water and wastewater systems. So wastewater systems have been a pretty big topic in connection with this bill. The House did spend time on this. So they added more language here to, I think, address some of the smaller alternative wastewater systems that are in some of the towns. Next, the municipality shall allow at a minimum duplexes within smart growth areas to the same extent that single family dwellings are allowed. Require parking waivers in appropriate smart growth areas and situations.
Ellen, can I stop you on
Yep.
duplexes? So this goes in both versions, it goes a little further than what we did in terms of consistent with the character of the area, but this is just for the communities that want grants under the bylaw modernization, right?
Correct.
Okay. Sorry,
We
go ahead.
addressed this aspects of this issue in 2 different places, one in the bylaws and one in the housing. I can't remember which, 237, whatever, where we talked about this.
Yeah, but yeah, this is going to be required of the 41 towns that asked for financial help. The
Right.
other one is for the whole state, but
Right.
it's not a total mandate. It's a semi. It's not as strong as this language.
It's an encouragement.
Right.
Right, and this is restricted to smart growth areas, so it's allow duplexes within smart growth areas. So it's in a full mandate that duplexes are allowed.
Right. That's a good point. When we were struggling with the duplex issue and we came up with the middle ground of consistent with the character of the area, did that also apply to just downtowns or smart growth areas, or was it statewide?
I believe it is statewide. because it's in the section of law related to conditional use review. So it is 4 areas, but it's a little bit specific. So it's 4 areas that allow multi-unit dwellings and require conditional use review. Those multi-unit dwellings cannot be denied for character of the area.
Okay.
So they could be denied for other reasons like water constraints or building concerns, but character of the area, you can't say that a multi-unit dwelling doesn't fit the character of the area.
When you do your bullet things of things that this committee has passed, I'd be very curious as to whether we ever passed anything on duplexes per se, other than the one you're talking about. I don't, in other words, I don't know whether that was a compromise as it went through the whole thing and we started off stronger, but if you can refresh our memory on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the duplex language came out of 237, but I will check.
Thank you.
All right, number 3, the municipality shall require parking waiver provisions in appropriate smart growth areas and situations. It shall review and modify street standards that implement the complete street principles and that are oriented to pedestrians. And then this is where there's another change a little bit. So the municipality shall adopt dimensional, use, parking, or other standards that allow compact neighborhood form and support walkable lot and unit density, which may be achieved with a standard allowing at least 4 units per acre with site and building design standards or by other means established by the department. So the House slightly modified your language. They spent a lot of time talking about acreage size. And overall, I think both the Senate and the House have a goal of this section being flexible. And so they are, the department is allowed to set standards here on how to achieve unit density. So allowing 4 units per acre or by other means established in the guidelines. So it doesn't necessarily mean that 1/4 acre lots couldn't be used. I think I recall that there was they had a hard time deciding on an acre size, so they just removed it. And then finally, the last change, they added another bullet point. So the municipality shall demonstrate how the bylaws support implementation of the housing element of its municipal plan as provided for in 4382, related to addressing lower and moderate income housing needs. So they added that. And then finally, just so you know, the date here is by September 1, 2021, the department shall adopt the guidelines to assist in applying for grants under this section. So that may need to change potentially if you want to move forward with this language. But so
Is Chris still with us?
I don't think so.
Is Jake?
No.
No.
They have departed.
Okay, well, I think this question is better asked of them, but I'll try it with you, Ellen. This stuff, I'm proud of this work we did here. This is really good. I'm just wondering whether most of these people who are applying for money are only ones that have already pretty much gotten there already. Because this is pretty good planning language, good smart growth language. And on the other hand, I can see towns being scared of committing to doing this, taking the money and having to do all these things. So you probably don't know the answer to that, but in seeing the applications and knowing the towns that have applied, we'll ask Chris whether this is achieving its purpose of making changes in those bylaws, or those things already exist, and they're taking the money and going to do other changes to modernize their bylaws. Anyhow, is that true that you wouldn't know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer, but my only thought is in looking back at this language, here at the top of page 3, F. So the intro language here, I do think is a little bit unclear, could be clarified slightly. So it says, to receive a grant, the municipality shall do the following things. And so it may make sense to invert that slightly and say, upon receiving a grant, the municipality shall do the following things.
Right. Right.
Because it almost reads as though they have to do all these things before they get the money.
Right.
And so
Right.
that, I think, leads to your concern about towns that have already done a lot of work, as opposed to helping towns that haven't done as much work.
Right.
So,
Mm.
Mr. Chair,
I hope, Ellen, you'll keep reminding us of that. We don't let that go, because I think that's pretty critical.
Mr. Chair, may I just ask a question?
Yes.
So, I mean, this is our legislative language, but they, of course, have now stood up this program and have their own language. So it would be interesting to see in this particular area it would be great to have a third side by side, sort of the operational language, which is what they're using. Because clearly the language wasn't too big of an impediment if 41 towns if 50 towns applied and 41 got grants. So I'd just be curious to see if the language here seemed to be less of a hurdle in the operational program, which got set up. And I think as we look at actually finally passing this, we should see what they actually did.
Can you work with Chris to put a third element in there, Ellen? I think
Sure.
we asked Chris already to come up with language changes he would want to see that this does not reflect. I think I've always heard, Senator Clarkson, that these 6 things are aspirational and not required up front.
Right.
I think Ellen's correct. That's the way it could technically read, but I'm even worried, even if it's aspirational, are people applying when they know they have already met it or easily can meet it, and it may not be going to the best places that need the changes. So we'll keep an eye on that. All right, so the other thing I guess we can move to is the section on downtown tax credits. Do you have something on that as well, Ellen?
I don't have anything prepared because the House just removed everything that you did. And so I can put that language up, but it's actually very simple. It just adds downtown neighborhood development areas to the downtown and village tax credit program. So it just adds that is an area where buildings are eligible to receive those tax credits.
Okay, could you just, before we end, we have like 4 minutes, can you give us a quick overview of what the downtown tax credits can be used for, and maybe the highlights of what the expansion we had wished for would do for those neighborhood development areas, and what a neighborhood development area is?
Sure. So the state designation program has 5 different designations in it. There are these sort of 3 core programs and then add-on designations. So the 3 core designations are downtowns, village centers, and new town centers. So that currently tax credits are available in designated downtowns and designated village centers. There are 3 types of tax credits under this program. They are for facade improvements to the outside of the building, code improvements, such as like elevators is one of the big examples. And then there's also a historic rehabilitation tax credit, so that for historic buildings. So buildings in existing downtowns and village centers are eligible to apply for these tax credits. And so your bill was going to extend that to also include neighborhood development areas. So neighborhood development areas are added on top of either a downtown village center or new town center. And so it is, it covers that designation and then also extends further into the residential areas around the compact centers. So they're largely neighborhoods where people live.
Is that designated specifically? I mean, when they get a map and say, this is it, and we want approval for that? Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
are there guidelines, like how far out from the town center they could go, or?
Yes. Yes. It's either 1/4 mile or
Right.
1/2 mile from the center of the downtown. So they're larger than the centers, but not by much. They're not supposed to be huge areas because it's just supposed to be the around the commercial core.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, one of the reasons I think this is so attractive is our village cores and downtown cores are actually smaller than we think. We think, oh, the whole downtown, but actually the designated parts for these village centers and downtowns are actually smaller than you think. So that's particularly for me why the neighborhood development areas are attractive for us to expand into, because, you know, in our town, it would basically just include the rest of what we all consider downtown.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Anything anybody wants to add, or we'll obviously be revisiting this, but this was a great session. Thank you, Ellen, very much. Do you have anything you want to say in closing at all?
No, I just would add that I think the part that the House struggled with is that there are 23 downtowns, there are 200 village centers, but there are only 7 or possibly 8 neighborhood development areas. So there are only a few, and they're only located in certain areas. So there are more towns applying all the time, but that program is not as old as or as large as the other programs.
But this would make it more attractive to apply for them.
I think so.
Potentially.
Yeah. So I think that was a piece of what is going on.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellen. We will now move on to S79, and we have with us Tate Brooks, and I don't know if anybody else.
David Hall is with us.
David Hall. So I'll just give a brief overview for the committee of where we're at, and thank you, Tate and David, for being here. This bill is our rental housing health code bill. It also had VHIP, and I always forget the nomenclature for the revolving loan fund. I think we wanted $5 million for VHIP and $1 million for the revolving loan fund. That got into the budget, but the bill did not pass. So we have another of these situations where we appropriated money with like a sentence, and we didn't fully by law define the program. So we've been working on this. This committee has been working on this bill for, I think, 3 years. I think other people have been working on it for a lot longer. It has primarily to do with enforcement of the rental housing health code and the shortcomings of doing it through a volunteer program at the local level. Um, we passed it, the House made a few changes and we concurred and sent it to the governor. We were taken a little bit by surprise on the veto and we tried to stop that from happening as best we could, because many of the concerns were not, let's put it this way, loudly articulated. But that's the prerogative of the governor's office. And I know for one, Senator Clarkson and I have been working very hard to get to yes on this. Senator Brock will warn us that he told us so. But still trying to get to yes. And that's why I've asked Scott to post the bill as passed the two chambers and the governor's veto message, to send it to us so we can print it out and look at it. But I'd like to start with David, if I could, to tell us what he understands from the veto message and from what passed to be the issues as we can decipher from the veto message, that we would need to change if to get the governor's approval, and then we'll talk with Tate and he can probably shed even greater light on that. Is that okay with you folks, or do you have suggestions for a different order? I'm not sure it matters a lot, but I'd like to get grounded in the specifics of what we know so far. And David, in your presentation, could you just go through, we don't have to deal with VHIP and the other things, but just to refresh our memory, what's in S79 and what, from your understanding, are the objectionable areas? I know that there were several that we never intended to do anything other than what the governor was concerned about. So I think those are easily fixable, and then we can talk about the other areas where we did intend to do different than what the governor wants. Clear as mud, right, David?
Yeah. Good morning, David Hall, Legislative Council. Honestly, I would really defer to the administration on its position with regard to its objections to the bill and the basis for the governor's veto. I hate to put words in their mouth, and honestly, I haven't read that letter in its entirety closely enough that I could do that justice. So I'm glad that Mr. Brooks is here and he'll be able to do that. I can tell you, sort of at a higher level, the thrust of the components of S79 and where I understand there to be some discomfort with what the bill would have done had it not been vetoed. I mean, remember that, going back a couple of years now, we discussed, I had prepared for you a rather lengthy compilation of the statutory and regulatory provisions that currently govern rental housing, health, and safety. And there is a significant amount of overlap within the state and then between the state and localities on what is supposed to happen, who has authority to do what with respect to rental housing. And right now, the Department of Health has full regulatory authority over anything that might be considered a public health hazard or public health safety concern. And authority is vested in the Secretary of Health and in the Agency of Human Services and the State Department of Health at the state level to enforce those types of health and safety concerns. And under that authority, the Department of Health has adopted the Rental Housing Health Code, which addresses all kinds of issues from building safety to infestations to adequate plumbing and heating and water supplies, et cetera. That's all on the books, right? And then sort of the other leg of the stool on the health side is that local governments, municipalities are also able to have local boards of health, local health officers, and enforce both the state components of that health code and also any local health regulations. Municipalities also have their own authority for building codes. They have building inspectors. So lots of overlap between state and local health people. There is another component to the whole system, which is the Division of Fire Safety within the Department of Public Safety. And it has what is, I've always heard in testimony characterized as being about 60-ish% of the same authority, because it has fire safety and life safety, electrical, plumbing authority over all what are called public buildings, which includes condos, it includes state buildings, it includes commercial buildings, it includes not all living situations, because it doesn't include single family homes, but it does include rental buildings. And so the thrust of S79 was to take a look at the situation we have on the ground, which is this: State Department of Health has this authority, doesn't really exercise it. Local departments of health have the authority, don't really have the capacity. State Division of Fire Safety, Life Safety has the people and the know-how, but not enough capacity and not the complete authority to do everything that health otherwise should or would be doing. So S79 in a few places, in an attempt to just streamline the language into its existing authority, this bill would expand and give to Department of Public Safety the rest of what it doesn't already have, provide personnel to do a complaint-based system as we have now, and to basically round out the rest of the inspection and enforcement that they don't already do under the auspices of fire and life safety. There are ways, and I don't want to get too deep into drafting here, but there are lots of ways to crack this nut, right? We could have started from scratch and come up with a whole new chapter and title and law, or chapter and subchapter in law, and said from the beginning, public safety, fire safety, here's the parameters of your authority on health and safety for rental housing. Here's how you're going to do your inspections. Here's how you're going to do your enforcement. Here's what the penalties and fines are going to be. Here are the remedies, etc. That could have been created from whole cloth. That was one way to do it. A second way to do it would be to take the language verbatim from what's already over on the health side and graft it into the public safety side and say, Department of Public Safety, here's the exact same language that Department of Health has. You're going to have it now. And we want you to do the same thing they're doing with the new people we're giving you. And then the final way, third possibility would have been to do it the way the S79 does it, which is to say, within the structure you've already got, which is frankly a little bit unwieldy because it's been changed a lot over the years to not just be fire, but to be other things, and say, we're going to try to just insert into your existing authority whatever words we might need to be clear that you can do rental housing, health, and safety. And so S79 does that, I'd say, in a minimalist way. It also has an implementation provision at the end, which sort of parses out who's supposed to do what. And so having taken that path, I think there are concerns, whether it's from landlords, the administration, or whomever, about the way the words actually read, because they, they're the existing law, and that there may be a disconnect between what the law says and what actually happens. For instance, this concept of a complaint-driven system. Fire safety right now uses a complaint-driven system. That is not the limit of their statutory authority. Technically, tomorrow, fire safety could go out and have a system that's not just driven by complaints. And, it does that for new buildings. It has to go out and issue permits and certificates of occupancy, stuff like that. But, by and large, fire safety only has the people and the time and capacity to do complaint-driven inspections. And that was always, at least from the testimony that I've heard, that was always their intent and always the legislature's intent, that that's the kind of system that would be continued into the future. Again, the statutory language is not specific on that point. It doesn't say, when conducting inspection of rental housing, you shall only use a complaint-driven system. And so I think there was definitely discomfort in some of the committees and some of the communities about the absence of such language. So that's one possible disconnect. Another one is in sort of the enforcement side, the fines, the penalties. There was some heartburn within certain committees from certain members about the breadth of the enforcement language that currently exists in law, where it says, you could have criminal penalties or fines up to $5,000. And there was no attempt in S79 to draw a tighter line around, for instance, the penalty, the punishment fitting the crime. That's a little, again, that's a disconnect between what the statute says and what practices. I mean, reality of any given enforcement scheme in all of state government, there is the way that the language usually constructed. It says a penalty or a fine shall be not more than or up to $5,000 per occurrence, not more than 2 years imprisonment, et cetera. I mean, the reality underlying every single one of those statutes, of course, is that there is always some give and take. There's some push and pull between statutory authority versus prosecutorial discretion. What will an agency or attorney general pursue versus what they have the authority to impose. So I think a disconnect between how broad the language is in statute on enforcement versus, I think a lot of people that were concerned about it would have liked to have seen some more tailoring on what the penalties should be for particular violations, et cetera. There's authority underlying in the statute about municipal enforcement, state enforcement, condemnation of buildings, these types of broad provisions that are on the books that would have been carried over into rental housing that could also be more tailored. But again, I think in this, I don't want to speak for the division, but it was their preference at the time that this bill was being crafted that they be able to avail themselves of the language that they already know and the format that they already have and the system that they already use. So they, rather than coming up with something new or, borrowing from health, they felt more comfortable with the scheme that they already have. That's been testimony over a few years. I'm not purporting to attribute any position to fire safety at this point. I have no idea what their position on the bill is, but as the bill was coming along and the options were being considered, that was testimony that I heard. The new pieces in this bill are the mandate for registering certain housing and for providing data to the state. The legislature started down this path a few years ago by requiring the Department of Taxes to collate the data that it has through the landlord certificate and make that information available to the public. This would have gone, obviously, a couple of steps further. It would have been housed in DHCD. It would have added person power and funding to creation and maintaining of a registry and a database. There were guardrails in the legislation about who could access it and for what purpose, but it definitely is another step beyond what is currently in Title 32 that the Department of Taxes is charged with doing. Of course, there are exceptions to the registration requirements that are pretty technical. I don't think we need to get into those, but there's a lot of nuance in there about who is or isn't required to register. This bill would have created more positions. It would have created the registration fee that would fund those positions and that work on a go-forward basis. Up to 5 more positions at DPS, a couple of more at DHCD, or 1.5, plus the database management. But otherwise, besides the VHIP and the revolving loan fund, that's really the scheme. And, again, I guess I'll just finish by saying that this disconnect between language and intent seems to be a pretty big divide. And there's also some policy differences just on, whether we should even have a registry or a database, and who should administer that, and whether there should be a fee, et cetera. So I'll leave it at that and see if you have any questions.
David, that was great. I want to ask the committee, I'm going to honor David's request, though I think in some ways he violated his own request by going into unwittingly what the administration's objections were on several fronts. But I was going to say we can turn that over to Tate to better do that. But I was wondering if the committee would like David to walk through the bill, at least up to the VHIP and other things, very cursory review, but so you can see it again if you need your mind refreshed on the specifics of the bill. I would ask him to take 10 minutes to just do that, and then we would take a break. Do you feel a need to see the bill? I know Senator Clarkson doesn't, but but other people might benefit from just going through it again. I generally like to do that because I don't want to assume that people have memories of the detail. I mean, I've lived with this. I've met with Tate on this, and so I'm very familiar with all the sections. But it couldn't hurt to take 10 minutes to just see the bill again.
I think also, Michael, it would be helpful for the people watching on YouTube. I think those of us who've been intimately involved, not everybody has been. So I think that as we launch into this work, it would be helpful for the broader audience.
Okay. David, could you, with a 10-minute time frame, could you just walk us through S79, pull it up on the screen maybe? And
Sure. I would turn to Scott and see if I am a co-host at this point and able to share. It looks like I'm not, so I'd have to have that opportunity.
David, I just made you a co-host.
Great, thank you. Let's see, the best way for me to do this is probably just going to be to pull it up here.
Tate, are you okay with coming back at 10 after 11?
Mr. Chairman, I'm okay with that. Yes.
Thank you very much.
All right. Is everybody seeing S79 on the screen?
Yep.
Great. So 37 pages, but a lot of fill. So I will be quick. I will stick to the 10-minute timeline and take you through this briefly. As I alluded to at the beginning, we're talking specifically about the existing statute that governs the Department of Public Safety's Division of Fire Safety. You'll see in the very beginning here, Chapter 173 is right now called Prevention and Investigation of Fires. But again, over the years, those things have, this authority has been expanded a little bit, and in different areas, you'll see the reference to energy standards. I mean, that's just because of some energy work you guys did. It's a little narrow, but what I'm trying to do here with expanding the title of the chapter and the subchapter is to reflect the fact that this isn't just fire anymore. That's not everything that they do. So for instance, I mean, in 2729, we're talking about not only the general provisions, we're talking about fire safety, we're talking about carbon monoxide, et cetera. So again, as I said, the scope of their authority applies to what we call a public building. And you don't have the whole definition here, but it's expansive. And it does include, as you'll see already in D, a building in which people rent accommodations, whether overnight for a longer term. So, I mean, right now, fire safety has that authority over rental housing, over condos, over hotels, over Airbnbs. I mean, if it's rented to the public, then they have that 60% authority to come and do inspections and enforcement. This adds specifically rental housing as you are defining it in subsection F, and that is specifically to include long-term rental housing that's, subject to Chapter 9 VSA 137, that's a landlord-tenant law. And then also short-term rentals as we define them in the health title in 18 VSA 4301. So both long-term and short-term rental housing, we just want to make sure those are specifically included here. I mean, the crux of this whole thing is this line in 2731. It is adding, the authority to adopt rules governing the construction, health, safety, sanitation, and fitness for habitation of buildings, maintenance and operation of premises, preventions of fires and removal of hazards, prescribed standards necessary to protect the public. And that's a freestanding statutory authority. It's also the specific authority to adopt rules to govern these issues. And that could include, having a very specific framework about how they do their work, what the standards are, et cetera. You'll see later on in the implementation section, the idea is that fire safety would adopt in whole cloth the current health code.
David, I have one specific question on short-term rentals. I know this committee and you worked on a short-term rental bill, maybe more than one. And I remember there having to be some notice to people who are renting short-term rentals that if they had any complaint about it, they could call either the Department of Health or the Department of Fire Safety. Am I dreaming that up?
No, that's correct. The current law says that the proprietor of a short-term rental has to provide the contact information for both Department of Health and the Division of Fire Safety.
So the implication, I guess, of that would be that at least the legislature intended that the Department of Fire Safety could do something with that complaint, or the Department of Health could do something with that complaint.
Yes, there's another provision in that chapter that says that basically, even though it's housed in Title 18 and it's under DOH, nothing in this is intended to, limit the authority of the Division of Fire Safety.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So 2731, I mean, again, as I said, a lot of this is just the existing statute and authority. The new matter here in B3, this is an importation of the language from the current health code. A few years back, you guys added to the local health officer section of Title 18 what they had to do as far as the protocol for inspections, investigations, and issuing reports. So this is that language. It is taken from Title 18 local health officials. It is put here so that when DFS would conduct these inspections and investigations, they'd have to follow the same protocol as far as issuing reports, what the violations are, how to correct them, et cetera. 2733 here, these orders to repair, rehabilitate, remove a structure, all existing law, all existing authority. The one addition is that you have to provide notice to people who would be displaced by one of these orders. The penalty provision, same. This is existing law, and I think maybe this is a place where there's concern, where there's this opportunity to be fined not more than $10,000. Obviously, significant amount of money, 20 for a subsequent violation, et cetera. Administrative penalties of $1,000 per violation. Again, these are all part of the existing statutory authority for DFS. Same with 2736. The intent here is that a municipality that has its own program can continue to operate that side by side with the state. So this is a lot of language, but you'll see this is mostly just sort of statutory cleanup. There's a lot of capitalization.
Just one quick question on that.
Yep.
I was unclear whether the 7 places that have their own program, do they preempt this or they're concurrent with this?
They're concurrent.
Okay.
Yep. They're concurrent now, and the authority is concurrent. Whether you even have your own, detailed program established the way that Burlington does, or your any given municipality, there is concurrent authority right now between the State Department of Health, the local Board of Health, local health officials, and then to the extent they apply DFS as well.
Okay.
All right. So, again, the housing registry is here. This would be added to DHCD, and you've got all this information that they're supposed to collect. There's some provisions here that deal with the interplay between a city that already has its own system has to provide the information to the state. If you pay to register with a city, you do not also have to pay the state. This is the registration requirement. It's housing and short-term housing. It's $35 fee per unit. Same deal about, I already mentioned the fee piece. And then we have exceptions. If you're already registered with the mobile home parks division, there's some nuance there. If it's not offered to the general public, you don't have to register it. If it's housing as a benefit of farm employment, you don't have to register that for a time. And there's the fund created to manage the fee revenue that's generated. There is a penalty for failure, but that doesn't come online until a couple of years down the road. You guys set that up in a staggered approach so that the requirement comes online. The penalty for not registering is going to wait. As I said, there were DPS positions authorized and DHCD positions, 5 and 1.5 respectively. This is the local health pieces. This is just housekeeping. No substantive change there, except for this inspection report language, as I said, is moved over to Title 20, and then the language above says if you're working with DFS or you're doing an inspection on your own, you have to follow the same protocols, issue the inspection report, etc. So the transition provisions, we're about a 1 minute here, and I think this is important. So I'll spend my last minute on this. Because as I mentioned at the very beginning, this is sort of the roadmap of how things are supposed to work. So you'll see in A, so until DPS adopts rules governing rental housing health and safety, DOH, local officials, and DPS would have this concurrent authority to enforce rental housing health code adopted by the Department of Health. 2 says DPS can immediately adopt a rule incorporating that code without having to go through the Administrative Procedures Act. So if they don't change it, they can just adopt it without having to do the rulemaking process specifically. It just moves from one department to another. However, if they do make substantive changes to that code, then they do have to go through the rulemaking process in the Vermont APA. Once they do adopt rules governing housing, health, and safety, this is how it works. 1, DPS is the state government entity with primary authority to enforce state laws governing rental house and health and safety. 2, DPS and local officials have concurrent authority to enforce state and local laws governing rental housing, health, and safety under these applicable chapters. And then 3, DOH, State Board of Health, local health have concurrent authority to enforce state and local laws governing public health hazards and public health risks as those are defined in Title 18. So that's sort of the division of labor anticipated going forward if this were to become law. And I think that's it.
You did a great job.
Yeah.
Okay, so David, are you able to stay with us till noon?
Unfortunately, I have to go back to commerce and start talking about VITA.
Okay,
Ah,
at what time? Now?
Now,
Okay. Well, if you could if you can rejoin us, that would be great. We're going to
Yep.
hear from Kate. It's now 11:02. Let's come back at 11:15 and we'll continue our discussion on this.
And-
Anybody have any questions or comments?
I just want to say, David, I think you did a fabulous job. That was great.
oh, thanks. I will come back as soon as and if I can, okay?
Great.
Okay.
All right.
Give
Uh,
commerce our best.
Yes.
Indeed.
So Scott, can you take us offline and we'll reconvene at 11:15?